the horrifying reality of human trafficking. Despite the Emancipation Proclamation being issued in the 1800s, there were still over 36,000 people of African descent in the North who were held as slaves. Even though most northern states had already begun the struggle to abolish slavery, the majority of these slaves were kept in the states of New York and New Jersey. Slavery was extremely profitable for the economy of the United States both before and during the time of the Civil War. The success of the states can be directly attributed to the institution of slavery. Both men and women might be put up for auction and then resold on the streets. Slaves, whether male or female, were denied even the most fundamental rights to their lives. They did not even have any rights to their families, which meant that at any point their children could be taken away from them and they could be sold. Very young children as young as 4 or 5 were separated from their parents and sold into slavery so that they may be exploited. Slaves started to gain their freedom over time, following the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Not only did the laws of slavery evolve, but also through time, society as a whole grew to acknowledge the significance of protecting children and how their requirements are distinct from those of adults. There were a great number of courageous leaders who opposed the institution of slavery and fought to bring about significant changes in our country over time. However, even though we honor the likes of Abraham Lincoln, William Wilberforce, and many others who fought against the transatlantic slave trade, the number of people held as slaves in the world today is far greater than it has ever been in history. Slavery has a firm hold on society and is only getting worse, with sexual exploitation accounting for around 75–80 percentage points of all cases of human trafficking and slavery. It is also believed that 30,000 persons every year pass away as a result of being neglected, abused, diseased, or tortured while being trafficked for sexual exploitation. Slavery is most certainly not extinct. It is growing and brings in over $8 million each year even though no law prohibits the form of slavery that is practiced there. It is believed that the black market for human services generates more than $32 billion in annual revenue. Each year, the sale and trafficking of victims reach close to 20,000. This statistic accounts for victims as young as 5 and 6 years of age, and it includes them all. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, one youngster is groomed for sexual exploitation every 2 minutes. Every single year, there are 1.2 million youngsters who are victims of human trafficking. This amount did not include the millions of people who were already held captive as a result of human trafficking. In addition, UNICEF estimates that nearly 30 million children have been deprived of their childhood as a result of being sexually exploited over the previous 3 decades. According to the United Nations, people are trafficked into 137 countries from 127 different countries, and they are exploited in 137 different countries. Every year, 20,000 Nepali girls fall victim to human trafficking, and the majority of them are sold into prostitution in brothels in India or employed as domestic staff in Middle Eastern countries. Some of these girls are as young as 9 years old, and what's even more heartbreaking is that many of these girls end up having HIV within 2 years, and many of them die before they reach the age of 20. Although the majority of people associate the term human trafficking with countries such as Romania, China, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Thailand, Mexico, and Nigeria, there have been approximately 100,000 to 150,000 sex slaves in the United States since 2001. This is even though most people associate the term human trafficking with countries other than the United States. The internet, the phone, friends and acquaintances who have already been exploited. Public places like shopping malls, and even after-school activities where the victims. Families believe they are safe are all places where human traffickers look for people to exploit. The majority of child victims are the result of neglect on the part of their families, and society frequently views them as expendable. A bill called the Anti-Human Trafficking Act of 2006 was passed by the New York Assembly, which created strict criminal penalties for human trafficking and was also set to protect the victims of trafficking and slavery. To make these crimes more recognizable and easy to charge, this bill defined human trafficking much more broadly compared to other proposals. Not only would people confiscating passports and immigration papers be suspect and questioned under this new legislation, but so would anyone demonstrating any kind of possible abuse or threatening restraint. Although the bill had wide support, its penalties were argued. Defense lawyers felt that up to 15 years in prison for offenders was too tough. With the addition of sex trafficking to the New York City Penal Code in 2008, there have been a total of 32 people arrested for the offense. Nevertheless, the number of arrests is still a very small fraction of the total number of crimes that are perpetrated in the context of trafficking on an annual basis. There are very few instances of human trafficking that ever result in a conviction, and many of the pimps who are arrested are released and are free to continue to engage in these illegal activities because there is still a significant lack of awareness that needs to be built, as well as improvements in law enforcement for these crimes. Even with all of the measures that have been suggested, we have no law to stop this. Since there is no genuine law to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes, we are unable to provide adequate protection for the victims of these offenses. It is anticipated that in other locations like Kansas City, Missouri, at least one victim of commercial sexual exploitation is identified each month since the year 2000 due to charges of sexual abuse and neglect. This brings the overall number of victims of domestic minor sex trafficking in Jackson County alone to a minimum of 84, all of whom were identified by a single agency. According to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, 1,600 minors were arrested for acts of prostitution or the commercialization of vice in the year 2006. 744 out of 1,600 were female, making up 74% of the total, while 144 were younger than 14, making up 14% of the total. In the area surrounding Kansas City, the quantity of space available in protective shelters is not even close to being sufficient to provide beds and shelters for all of the youngsters who have been brought in and need necessary protection. Out of a total of 214 beds that are made accessible by the juvenile court system, only 25 of those beds are reserved specifically for females. The vast majority of accessible agencies do not assist victims who are under the control of a pimp or trafficker because, statistically speaking, this type of victimization is only temporary, even though they need protection. The vast majority of victims, once they have been freed, go back to their traffickers or pimps. A person who traffics people can make a profit of up to 2,000% off of a young girl who is sold for sexual purposes. After a certain amount of time, the pimp would typically turn around and sell the victim for an even higher price. This is because he will have trained her and destroyed her spirit by that point, which will make it simpler for her future purchasers and make her less of a nuisance for them. According to the findings of a study that was carried out in the Netherlands in 2003 and published in 2003, on average, a single sex slave earned her pimp at least $250,000 in a year. To put an end to this predicament and make things better, Skinner maintains that we, as a society, have a responsibility to comprehend the worth of each of these lives in the same manner that the trafficker comprehends the size of his profit margin. What do you think about this video? Do let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from us again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.